Hmm. I don't know why the image is so grainy tonight. Let me see something. Is that clearer or worse? I can't tell. Every time I think I've got the lighting issue in here solved. Well, that seems a little better anyway. So, what else is on folks' minds tonight? Happy Sunday, fiery fish. The meek will inherit the earth. Yes, indeed. I find the Beatitudes to be very comforting at times like these. Hey, Felicia. Yeah, it is easy to be scared at what might come. In fact, that's kind of why we started doing Sunday Scaries. Kathleen over on the YouTube side said that someone said something about Kent State 1970 that has her thinking. What's that, I wonder? Yes, it is May the 4th, Star Wars Day. That's fine, Felicia. Um, and that's okay, Dire Siren. I think it's okay to be unsure. Um, and it's okay to show up in places where you might get clarity and just wait and see what happens. So Kathleen said that her friend said, "Are we going to face that? I mean, the kind of thing that happened at Kent State in 1970 again, but now anyone who disagrees is suspect." I think it's not outside the realm of possibility, and I think um, in some ways anybody who disagrees has always been suspect. For folks who For a nation founded on the principle of free speech and freedom of expression, Americans actually don't deal with dissent very well. Um, you know, we we don't do very well at holding space for people who disagree with us or who think differently than we do. Um, so, um, again, the more I learn about our history as a country and as a culture, the more I realize that we have incredible ideals as a nation, and those ideals are enshrined in our Constitution, and we have a very checkered record of living up to them. Um, so, how do you know when Jesus is speaking to your heart? Good question. For me, it is almost always ambiguous and um, a matter of dawning realization over time. Um, you know, I've never had a burning bush kind of moment or a hand writing on the wall kind of moment. Usually, I find that when God is speaking to me, it is um, that quiet feeling in my gut that just won't go away, and it's usually something that um, I recognize in hindsight months later. Um, and it's usually something that I need other people to help me figure out and confirm. It, it eventually becomes a knowing. It doesn't start out as a knowing by any means. It usually starts out um, as a "you got to be fucking kidding me," um, and it usually stays on that level for a long time before it eventually becomes a knowing. Yeah, it's a question. The words I use, I call it that niggling little feeling in my gut that just doesn't go away. Um, yeah, Kathleen said in the comments on the YouTube side that she calls it a knock at the back door of her mind. Um, and that's often the way it is for me. Um, I love that image of a knock at the back door. Um, Sometimes it's the thing that just keeps coming up. Um, the older I get, the less likely I am to write something off as coincidence. A friend of mine likes to say, "Is it odd or is it God?" That what we write off as coincidence is, in fact, oftentimes God trying to tell us something. Um, yeah, that was exactly my feeling, Kathleen, when I started feeling, well, when it was first suggested to me that I might be called to ministry, I laughed out loud. And then as that feeling kind of kept growing and not going away, that was when the "you got to be fucking kidding me" kept coming up. But yeah, it's when I start hearing the same topic come up in different places with different people, in like widely different contexts, I start paying attention to that. Um, a couple of years ago, uh, we started trying to. We were looking for a way to be more engaged in my congregation, to be more engaged with the needs of the world. And we weren't entirely sure what that was, or where, as a community of faith, we were going with that. And I started having the subject of refugees and come up repeatedly and in varied contexts with different people. And so, we kind of started paying attention to that. And in time, we sort of discerned as a community that we were being called or invited to sponsor a refugee family. And we wound up doing that for about a year and a half with a family from Afghanistan. Um, yeah, and I eventually get to that point of it being, of just knowing. I often don't start there. I often don't. It takes time for me to get to that point. Um, so, and sometimes it feels like peace and excitement, and sometimes it feels like heartburn. Um, but usually it comes to a place of peace. It comes to a sense of this is this is the path. It doesn't make sense. It's not what I would have chosen. It's not in any way rational, but this just is this is the path I feel like I'm supposed to go down right now. Um, and I find when I hold those things loosely, you know, it's this odd combination of being committed and at the same time not being married to the idea. Like I don't know how to articulate that really. Um, but in time, like that becomes clear. Um, and if I start down that path, but I'm like holding the next couple of steps on that path loosely, and I'm open to course correction as it goes, I tend to wind up where I'm supposed to be, I think. The hard part is when I think I know where I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to be doing, and it's not happening, and it's not happening on my time frame or the way I want it to happen or anything else. And sometimes I have to stop and take a step back and be open to the possibility that I got it wrong. Um, and, I'm slowly but surely learning in my life that um, if I'm having to force it, it's maybe not where I'm supposed to be. Um, there's a difference between needing to work at something versus having to force it. Um, and and also I'm learning to recognize that uh, there have been a lot of times in my life where if I had gotten what I wanted when I wanted it, I would have sold myself short. Times when I was very frustrated because I wasn't, things weren't moving and I just felt stuck and whatever. Um, it just wasn't time yet. And what eventually God put in my path turned out to be um, far more of a blessing than what I was prepared to settle for. So, yeah, and I mean that's one of the things that recovery has taught me uh, is that idea of detachment about uh, process and outcome of do the footwork, um, do my part, um, and then leave it alone. And when it's time to know, I'll know. I remember early on in sobriety, um, less than a year sober, um, I was talking to my sponsor and I was all worked up about something. And it was like it was a huge crisis in my life. In fact, it was such a huge crisis that now 15 years later, I can't even remember what it was that I was so worked up about. Um, but I was very worked up about it. And I remember saying to him, and I just don't know what to do. And he said, well, then don't do anything. And I just looked at him and said, what are you talking about? And he said, if you don't know what to do, don't do anything. When it's time to know, you'll know. Um, trust that your higher power, trust that God, however you want to call that, the Holy Spirit, whoever, um, when it's time for you to move, will move you in the right direction. Um, when it's time for you to know what to do, um, you'll know. When it's time for you to do something, you'll know what it is you're supposed to do. You may not know everything, but you'll know the next step, right? Um, and I found that to be the case in my life. That when it's time to know, I usually know. Um, so that's the other thing that I think is really important. I'm glad you said that, Ella. That God almost always speaks to me through other people. Um, the 10th time she told you to apply for a certain job. Yeah, it's oftentimes uh, that way for me. That um, I figured out because somebody has been patient enough to repeat themselves with me. Um, or, you know, two or three people are telling me the same thing or whatever. Sitting in the feeling of what it will feel like when the crisis is resolved. Um, and a lot of times I just try to deal with, you know, what's the next right thing? Um, what's what's right in front of me um, for me to deal with? Um, so I'm right now in the process of discerning a new call, um, and you know, discerning whether or not God is calling me to be somewhere else. Um, and right now, I don't know. Um, so in the meantime, I'm doing what's right in front of me that needs to get done, and you know, I've done the footwork to put myself in a position to be available uh, if I am being called to be somewhere else. Um, and in the meantime, I'm doing what's right in front of me and trying to be as helpful and useful as I can to the people around me in the short term until it's time to do something different. Um, which again is another thing that I learned in recovery. Another way in which recovery has shaped my spirituality is understanding what my purpose in life is. Um, and, you know, I believe that my purpose in life is to be of maximum service to God and the people around me, to be as helpful and as useful and what have you to the people around me. And so, I wake up every day and I ask God to show me how to do that. And I ask God to relieve me of the things that get in the way of that. Um, and I try to stay focused on that purpose for the day. Um, and sometimes I have to reset 5 times before lunch on that because um, I'm like a lot of human beings, selfish and self centered. So, why people don't like gooning, I don't know what gooning is. And I'm a little afraid to Google it. I'm okay, Aaron. How are you? Yeah, I should have stayed with that instinct. Oh, nice. Happy birthday to him. Too late, Kathleen. Fortunately, Google told me in the gentlest terms possible. So, moving on from that question, today being Star Wars Day, um, this is my opportunity to remind you that Leia was always the hero of the original trilogy, um, believe it or not. And also, she's a great role model for the world. Um, you know, stand up for what's right, even when it's scary. Um, May the fourth be with you too, and also with you, as they say. Um, stand up for what you believe in, even when it's scary or dangerous. Um, don't let the pain that you suffer transform itself into hate and turn you into the thing that you are fighting against. Um, every day is a good day to destroy a fascist regime. Um, and it's never a bad idea to strangle any misogynist space slug who gets in your way. So, Shubble, I was saying that Princess Leia was the actual hero of the original Star Wars trilogy. And yes, tomorrow will be Revenge of the Fifth. Um, so, yeah, absolutely. I'm also a Gen X parent and did my best to impart the wisdom of Princess Leia on my kids. I did not know that Cindy Williams auditioned for that part. And yes, I did know that about Carrie Fisher. And in fact, Carrie Fisher, um, separate from the character of Leia, Carrie Fisher was absolutely a hero of mine. There have been maybe three or four celebrity deaths uh, that have ever really made an impact on me, and hers was by far the biggest. I was gutted for weeks after Carrie Fisher died. Um, I have, in fact, in our living room, what Gretchen is referring to about the icons. I have two framed pictures in our living room. One is an icon of, uh, I mean, they're drawn in the style of a classical icon. Um, One is Carrie Fisher holding her dog and giving the world the finger, which is like just classic. And the other is, if you've ever seen the icons or the Renaissance paintings of the Madonna and child, like Mary holding the infant or usually toddler aged Jesus, imagine that image, but instead of the Madonna and child, it is the Mandalorian and child. Um, from the Mandalorian series. So, oh, thank you. Yeah, we call it a stole. Um, but I mentioned in my sermon this morning, at the beginning of my sermon, that I bought myself a new stole for Easter. It's the first new stole that I've bought in 20 years, actually, or 21. So when I was ordained, I was given a stole as a gift, my red stole that I was ordained in. And then, like, I bought a set from the same maker. They were not a set. I bought one in each of the liturgical colors, let's put it that way, so that I had enough to get through the whole church year, um, from the same maker. So they were all fairly similar in style anyway. Um, Oh yeah, yeah. We have to buy them ourselves in like the clerical collar shirts, and yeah, it ain't cheap. Um, Occasionally, people will give us those things as a gift. I actually the stole that I wear now for my blue stole in Advent was a gift, um, because I had mentioned somewhere that I had always had trouble finding a blue stole that I liked, and somebody who makes stoles gave me one. Um, but anyway, I decided to splurge and buy myself a stole as a gift at Easter, and I decided I wanted a rainbow stole, um, and so I got one, and I mentioned it in my sermon this morning only because um, the pattern or the style or the particular image of this stole is the it's all of the colors of the rainbow. Um, but the image is actually of a road kind of winding towards the mountains in the distance. And it's called, the pattern is called Road of Hope. Um, and I mentioned it in my sermon this morning only because it was the only way I always struggle with introductions for my sermons. The hardest part for me is always to figure out, like, how do I start, right? Um, And, it occurred to me that a lot of the stories that we run into in the Gospel of Luke, um, and a lot of the stories that we run into in the season of Easter are about a road of hope. And sometimes it looks like a road of hope, and sometimes it doesn't. So last week, for the Sunday after Easter, the appointed gospel reading for the Sunday after Easter is supposed to be from John chapter 20, the story of Jesus appearing to the disciples and then to Thomas, what is often called Doubting Thomas, which I think is an erroneous name for that story. I don't think Thomas is doubting at all, but we call it the Doubting Thomas story from John chapter 20. That's the one that we were supposed to read last week, but it's because it's the assigned text for the Sunday after Easter every stinking year. This year, I chose to do something different, and we're in the year of Luke. And one of the great stories from the of the resurrection from the Gospel of Luke is the story of Jesus encountering two disciples on the road to Emmaus. So we read that last week, and I preached on that. And then today, like Gretchen, I preached on the transformation of Saul and Ananias, what is commonly called the conversion of Saul. And I think you could call it a conversion. I think it is as much a conversion for Ananias as it is for Saul. And I think just because that word conversion has a lot of baggage attached to it, I prefer to talk about it in terms of the transformation of Saul and Ananias. And my point this morning was that that story happens on a road of hope too. It just doesn't look like a road of hope at first glance, because Saul is on the road to Damascus with arrest warrants for any Christians that he finds there, when he gets knocked flat on his ass in the middle of the road and struck blind. And it doesn't look like a road of hope, but it actually is. And it's a road of hope both for him and for Ananias. And my point this morning was that on this side of Easter, all roads are roads of hope. And there's no resurrection without transformation. There's no resurrection that does not lead to and bring transformation. And if our idea of faith is static, then we are likely to miss out on what God is trying to do with us. Ananias was minding his own business, praying, and his whole world got picked up, turned upside down, shaken like a snow globe, and set back on the shelf. Hey, Ananias, go pray and lay hands on this dude Saul. And Ananias is like, bad idea. Like, I've heard about this guy. This is a bad idea, boss. And Jesus very firmly says, go. And I'm like, okay. You are welcome to pick my brain. I'll warn you, it probably won't take long. It's fairly small. So, absolutely. Let us pray. Loving God, we pray for Jen tonight as she grieves the loss of her husband to cancer. We pray that you would watch over her and her family in this time of grief and sadness. We pray that you would surround them with your love and your consolation. And we pray that you would give us all a sense of the hope to which you call us, that we might see hope on whatever road we find ourselves on. Amen. So, Shovel, I'm doing well. I hope you are too. Somebody asked a few minutes ago, what are my thoughts on the conclave? I don't. I don't have a lot of thoughts on it. I'll be curious to see who they elect. I generally find somebody said this to me once, and I have found it to be true, that when churches call a new pastor, they tend to either call somebody who they perceive to be a carbon copy of the last pastor, or they call somebody who they perceive to be the complete opposite of the last pastor, kind of depending on how they felt about the last pastor. Um, and, and oftentimes they wind up not getting either a carbon copy or the complete opposite, because, it's just, we are complex critters, let's put it that way, human beings in general. And so I'm wondering if the cardinals in the conclave will be looking for Francis 2.0, or will they be looking for the anti-Francis? I'll be interested to see how that goes. Hi, Saheta. How does the call process work? So for Lutherans, for ELCA Lutherans, the way the call process works is basically pastors fill out what's called a rostered minister profile. They keep changing the name, but it's a resume package. And actually, I'm not dispersed at the whim of my bishop. In fact, my bishop has almost no influence on where I wind up. So basically, we fill out this 20-page resume packet, and that gets sent to whichever synods, which is goes to the whichever synod, which is the Lutheran version of a diocese. We're interested in serving it. So when I filled out my paperwork recently, I got to choose which synods it was submitted to. And because I need to stay fairly close to where my kid is in high school, I submitted mine to 3 different synods: Delaware, Maryland, Lower Susquehanna, and Southeastern Pennsylvania. It's 4. It's also active on file in New Jersey Synod, but nothing's going to happen in New Jersey. So anyway, you submit this paperwork, and then From there, it varies by synod what happens with it. But generally speaking, there's somebody in the bishop's office who handles call process, who looks at your paperwork and looks at their vacancies and says, we think you might be a good fit for these. Here's their paperwork, read through it. Tell us if you're interested in any of them, and we will send your paperwork on to any of the ones that you're interested in. And then if they're also interested in you, then we'll set up some interviews. And the way it works in our system is first you have an interview with the call committee, which is a special ad hoc committee that is supposed to represent the congregation in this process. And just like I had to fill out a 20-page resume packet, the call committee puts together basically a 20-page resume package for the congregation. If it looks like there might be some interest on both sides, you go and you have an interview with the call committee. And if after that interview, they think you might be the one, they forward your name to the congregation council. That recommendation has to be unanimous. Everybody on the call committee has to agree to forward your name onto the congregation council. Then you have a second interview with the congregation council, and they have to, by a simple majority, vote to recommend you to the congregation as a whole. And then you come in usually for like a whole weekend, and you do a meet and greet with the congregation. People have a chance to ask you questions. Usually it's not like a formal grilling, it's just like a meet and greet, but some people are going to take that time to ask whatever their burning question is. And then you preach and lead worship, which is kind of like your audition, and then they vote. And in our system, congregation has to vote by at least a 2/3 majority to issue a call. I'll tell you, my own personal standard, if I'm interviewing for a call and a congregation votes by anything less than 80%, I'm going to decline that call. Because if you think about it, if a congregation votes by 2/3 plus one to issue a call, that means that 1 out of every 3 people in the room doesn't think you're the right person. That's just a really tough place to start a call from. And, but assuming that, assuming that a congregation votes by a 2/3 majority and says, yes, we want you to be our next pastor, then you have 30 days to say yes or no. And if you accept that call, then that's where you go. And basically you're there as long as you want to be there, or until something really bad happens. In our system, it's very hard to fire a pastor for anything other than misconduct. It's hard to fire somebody just because, well, we decided we don't like them. Because just like you had to have a 2/3 majority to issue a call, you have to have a 2/3 majority to terminate a call. That almost never happens. But on the flip side, if you're in a place where people are splitting hairs about whether or not they've got a 2/3 majority to get rid of you, you've probably already got your paperwork in and you're looking to leave, because, man, that's a miserable place to be. Is it hard to leave a church? It depends on the church. It has been hard. It has been, in my experience, hard to leave. because at least I have always loved the people that I was fortunate to serve amongst uh, and with. And I've been fortunate that I've not left a place with a bad taste in my mouth. Um, I've had a couple of times that it came close to that, um, but it is hard to leave, and it's hard to leave because um, it's hard to know if you've done what you were there to do. I tend to believe that God calls us to a particular place at a particular time to do a certain set of things, and um, it may be that you you thought you were going to be there for 10 or 15 years, and what you were there for was something that was accomplished in 3 years, and now it's time to get out of the way. Um, my first call out of seminary was, on paper, I was there to be a mission redeveloper. I was supposed to help them turn things around and revitalize their ministry and grow and become financially stable and able to afford a full-time pastor on their own and all those things. And none of that wound up happening. Um, hey, Hens, I'm glad you're here too. Um, but a lot of really good stuff did wind up happening. And in fact, when I left, my bishop said, "Hey, I know you're kind of bummed that, you know, redevelopment didn't happen, at least in the way that we were thinking about that when you came here. But I really think that you were the interim pastor that they needed for 40 years and never had. Um, that my role there was to help them um, work through some of their conflicts, help them get clear about who they were as a church and why they existed, um, help them break out of a cycle of really unhealthy and destructive conflict. Um, at one point I said with that congregation, I'm not going to tell you not to fight. It's in your DNA. It's kind of what you know how to do right now. Um, but um, I am going to insist that we fight like Christians, and then kind of elaborated on what that means. Um, and by the time I left, they had learned, you know, they hadn't stopped fighting, but they had learned how to fight like Christians, and they eventually um, came to a healthier place than they had been. Um, so, yeah, things can end on a better note. And, sometimes we do what we're here to do, and then it's time to get out of the way for the next person. Um, when I left my last call to come here, um, I had come to believe that what they needed for the next phase of their life was not me. Um, like they needed um, a set of skills and gifts that were not the skills and gifts I had. Um, and so at that point, the most faithful thing I could do was get out of the way for whoever was supposed to be there. And that's kind of how I feel about this process that I'm in now of discerning, am I still called to this place? And if not, then I need to get out of the way. Um, you know, um, I love my current congregation very much, but I'm not convinced that I'm the leader they need for the next phase of their life together. Um, and that's okay if it turns out that I'm not. But if I'm not, then I need to get out of the way. Um, because I have certainly seen congregations where a pastor stayed too long um, because everybody was comfortable. Um, the pastor was comfortable. Um, he knew the people and he knew kind of how the system worked, and um, if he didn't rock the boat and didn't make any waves, then everybody was going to go along to get along, and everything would be fine, except that nobody was actually growing, and the church wasn't actually serving its neighbors. Um, and so, you know, clergy can with all the love in the world and with no evil intent on anybody's part, um, clergy and congregations can form enabling relationships where they don't call each other on anything, they don't challenge each other on anything, and it in the long run winds up not being good for either. So, I'm sorry, I got to do the whole solve the puzzle so that they'll let me keep um, being live. These stupid puzzles used in hoops. Dumb. What is the best way to remove bad thoughts from an abusive relationship? Um, I guess my first question would be, say more about what you mean by removing bad thoughts. Um, the other thing that I would say is with a qualified therapist. Um, which I am not. Um, I know enough about counseling to do basically sort of what you might call mental health first aid. Um, okay, so the fact that you're talking to somebody is very good. The thoughts of what they did to you. So, to sort of paraphrase what I hear you describing, how do I get free of the anger, the bitterness of what somebody did to me, the harm that somebody did to me? How do I get free of that resentment? Um, and all I can tell you is what works for me. And again, we keep coming back to this theme tonight. Another thing that I learned in 12-step recovery is that the way I deal with resentments and get rid of them is to pray for the person. And I was taught that very early on in recovery, and I have found it to be true. It is hard work, And it is completely counterintuitive because I have to pray good stuff for that person. I What I was taught was pray for them to have everything in their life that you want in your life. If you want to have peace, love, and joy in your life, pray for them to have peace, love, and joy in their life. Um, and I have found that to be true. That is the most helpful way of approaching it. I want to be very clear that um, this does not mean um, excusing the behavior, and it definitely does not mean making myself a doormat to take more of it. Okay. If someone has done harm to me, I am not obligated to let them do more harm to me. Um, Getting rid of the resentment engendered by that harm is a matter of caring for my own peace of mind and well being and mental health and not allowing them to continue to harm me. Um, and so, you know, in very practical terms, what I was taught to do was every morning and every night get down on my knees, and I was taught that in this case posture matters. Actually, get down on my knees and pray for that person every morning when I get up and every night when I go to bed. Um, and pray for God to bless them with the things that I want to have in my life. Um, and it is hard work. I will tell you that there have been folks that I have prayed for months in that way, twice a day, every day for many months, praying for somebody until um, that resentment eased. And in most of those cases, um, those prayers did not change that person one bit, um, but it changed me, um, which was the point of the exercise anyway. The point of the exercise was not to get God to change them. Um, and the point of the exercise was not to you know get God to make them apologize to me. Um, the point of the exercise was for me to find peace. Um, it is really hard. The only thing harder was not doing it. The only thing harder for me was living with that anger and resentment. Um, you know, Laying awake, staring at the ceiling at 3 o'clock in the morning, grinding my teeth um, because of what somebody had said or done to me was harder than praying for them. Feeling all of that rage and anger in my gut um, 24 hours a day was harder. Um, and I want to be clear, this is not necessarily the path for everybody. I'm just saying this is what I was taught and this is what worked for me. Um, do you still have resentment if you can't do that? I don't know. I have no idea. Um, it's not for me to tell you whether or not you still have a resentment. Um, and there have been times in my life when I've asked myself that question: Do I still have a resentment towards this person? And uh, over time, um, praying about that question eventually brought me to clarity. Um, what I find is if I can think about that person and my blood pressure doesn't go up, if I can drive by their house if I can drive by their neighborhood and not want to detour past their house to give them the finger, um, if I don't find myself in an idle moment fantasizing about, you know, getting revenge, um, then I've maybe gotten past that resentment. Um, but ultimately, I was lucky to have some very wise spiritual teachers, and one of them asked me one day, Bob, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And I said, well, I want both. And he said, well, that's too bad. You can have one or the other. Pick one. And in the end, I decided that I wanted to be happy. Um, and that meant, letting go of righteous anger. Um, Now, the other thing, like I said, I learned this in the context of 12-step recovery, which means that for me, this was life and death. Like some people have the luxury of carrying their anger with them. Some people have the luxury of um, not doing these things. Um, and if you can tolerate the pain, um, hey, more power to you. What I have learned is I cannot tolerate the burden of carrying resentment. I can't. Um, it becomes toxic for me in a hurry, and I have enough problems with toxic shit going on up here. Um, this is enough of a circus zone without the anger and resentment. Um, and um, our our literature in the 12-step fellowship that I'm a member of says that resentment is the number one offender. Um, uh, that self-centered anger um, and self-righteous anger is um, incredibly dangerous. Um, and resentment kills people in recovery. Resentment, um, for me, my drug of choice was alcohol. Um, Resentment leads more people to drink uh, than probably anything else. Um, and so for myself, I had to learn how to do this. And I still don't do it perfectly. And there's still days when I suffer a lot more than I need to because I'm not willing to do this. Um, and the other thing is, I don't have to do it perfectly. Um, and sometimes I just got to make the effort. One of the um, Yeah, absolutely. Letting go of anger is tough when the offender was in the wrong. Um, what I have found for myself is that oftentimes um, I'm so focused on the ways that they're in the wrong that I'm not willing to look in the mirror and see the places where I'm also in the wrong. Um, like just because they're wrong doesn't mean I'm right. Just because somebody else was in the wrong doesn't mean I wasn't in the wrong. Um, and yeah, there are times when anger can be productive. When as Ella said a minute ago, if there's something I can do with my anger to correct a situation, I'll hold it. Um, and that's again for a lot of people that's perfectly fine and appropriate. Um, it's not super healthy or helpful for me, or for most people with addiction issues. Um, the other thing is sometimes it's enough just to start making the effort. You know, um, being willing to be willing. Like uh, the way it was put to me was, are you willing? You know, uh, are you able to pray for this person? No. Well, are you willing to pray for this person? Also, no. Well, are you willing to be willing to pray for this person? Well, I'm willing to stop suffering. I'm willing to stop dragging this anger and resentment around with me. I'm willing to stop letting this thing over here poison the rest of my life. So, yeah, I guess maybe I'm willing to try this. Um, and one of the guys who first taught me this almost 30 years ago um, said that, when he first started doing it, he was going through a very bitter divorce. And the first time that he, again, taking the advice of someone else, tried to pray for his soon to be ex wife, uh, he got down on his knees and said, God, I don't mean it, and I don't believe it, but I hope you bless that bitch. And for a long time, that was the best he could do, but he was willing to try. Um, and so he kept at it, and eventually he came to a place where he wasn't carrying that resentment around anymore. Um, you know, I can say with complete honesty that I do not resent my ex wife anymore. Um, I can say with complete honesty that people who did enormous harm in my life, I no longer resent. Do I trust those people? No. Do I, are they on my Christmas card list? Nope. And not gonna be. Um, and, you know, it's not even to say that they are like, my bosom buddies or, anything else. It's simply a matter of I don't sit around grinding my teeth anymore thinking about what shitty things they did to me. Um, did they do shitty things to me? Absolutely. Did my praying for them change the shitty things that they did or get them to acknowledge those shitty things? No. Um, it just means I don't sit around reliving that shitty thing over and over and over and over, day after day after day after day. Um, that, I'm not being poisoned by that thing that they did every minute of every day anymore. You know, the choice to forgive those people. Um, I think of it as forgiveness, Ken. Um, and the choice to forgive those people um, was in no way about um, changing them or restoring anything, or like in the cases that I'm talking about, it was purely about setting myself free, or letting God set me free. Well, congratulations, Celtic Goddess, and good luck. Um, and yeah, it, it should be noted that none of this is about excusing what somebody did to us either. Forgiveness does not mean excusing what somebody did. In fact, quite the opposite. Um, you know, if it needs forgiving, then by definition, it's not okay. Forgiving somebody does not mean saying, "Oh, it's okay." No, it means saying that was not okay, but I'm not going to let it own me, right? Um, you know, if what they did was okay, it wouldn't need to be forgiven. Um, and as I often say, forgive and forget is an incredibly unhelpful phrase, in my opinion. Because I will often hear people say, well, you know, I can't forget what they did, so I can't forgive. Okay. Um, I'm not suggesting that you should forget. And the other, if something is bad enough that it needs forgiving, it's probably pretty hard to forget. And on the other hand, if something's easy to forget, it probably doesn't take much forgiving. Um, we are only human. And again, uh, forgiving others is not easy stuff. Um, it's hard. It is hard work. Um, but it is a choice that we can make. It is an action that we can choose to undertake, um, and then work at. And it's ultimately about setting ourselves free. Um, you know, there's a book called The Book of Forgiveness, written by Desmond Tutu and his daughter. Desmond Tutu was the Anglican Archbishop of South Africa. He is a black Anglican priest, or was a black Anglican priest, who lived through apartheid and was one of the people who guided South Africa through the process after the end of apartheid of setting up the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that dealt with the legacy of apartheid and told the truth about what happened and what had been done to Black South Africans by the regime, and set about this hard work. Um, and um, he talked about that none of the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission made what was done to Black South Africans under apartheid okay. Um, but it made it possible for Black South Africans and white South Africans to live together into a new future. Um, I mean that's what it's about. And like I said, it doesn't change the people that we're dealing with. The first guy I ever had to do this with, I prayed for that guy every morning and every night for over 6 months. Um, and when I finally got to the point where I could say, in all honesty, that the anger was gone, the resentment was gone, I did not wish ill on this man anymore, etc. The very next day, I ran into him in the grocery store. Good night, hens. Um, and, the very next day, I ran into him in the grocery store, and 30 seconds of conversation was enough for me to know that he hadn't changed a bit. But, we stood there in the grocery store for about 2 minutes and exchanged pleasantries, and he went on his way and I went on mine. And as I was walking away, I realized I wasn't grinding my teeth and my blood pressure hadn't gone up. And I wasn't secretly hoping that on his way out to the car with his cart full of groceries, he got run over by a bus. Um, and I went home that night and um, watched a movie, and actually watched the movie instead of just having it on while my head was replaying all of the horrible things this guy had done to me. And I went to bed that night and I didn't lay awake, unable to sleep, thinking about him. He wasn't living rent free in my head anymore. That's the payoff. Um, and, ultimately for me, that's why it's worth the work. Is it easy? No. Is it fun? No. Is it something I want to do? No. Well, frankly, what I want to do when somebody has harmed me is I want to harm them back, right? I want revenge as much as the next person. Um, and more than that, I want to be vindicated, damn it. I want to be right, and I want everybody to know that I'm right, and I want everybody to say publicly, yes, you are right. They were an SOB and they harmed you, and that was wrong, and you were right. And, and I'll tell you, I've even had that happen in a couple of cases, and it didn't change anything. It didn't make me feel any better. Um, ultimately now what I want is peace. I want to have peace in my soul. That's all I want. I want to be able to go to bed and close my eyes and go to sleep. I want to be able, when I'm sitting with my wife and my kid, to be thinking about my wife and my kid, not what some SOB did to me 5 years ago. I want to be able to drive down the road listening to an audiobook and actually be paying attention to the audiobook and not thinking about, how mad I am at somebody for something that they did to me. Um, and I guess what I'm getting at is I've come back around to that question: do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And for me, these days, I will choose happy almost every time. And in the times when I choose being right over being happy, eventually I realize I should have chosen being happy. Um, Excuse me. Now, I should also be clear. This does not mean giving people a pass on bad behavior. It doesn't mean continuing to be a doormat for other people's abuse. Um, and it doesn't mean not standing up to bullies. Um, and in fact, I think this is one of the reasons why being in community matters. This is why allies and accomplices matter. Um, because Pride is coming up next month. And my friends who are in the LGBTQ community don't need to be dealing with the hate mongers. Um, that's something I can do for them, right? Um, I can stand in the breach for them. So there's an organization called Silent Witness Peacekeepers in this area. And basically, what we do, is we go to um, events where um, LGBTQ people are likely to be targeted by. Good night, Saheda. Sleep well. Oh, thank you, Diz. I appreciate you too. And you're very welcome, Colleen. Um, so, um, Silent Witness Peacekeepers Association, we go to events where LGBTQ plus people are likely to be targeted by homophobic and transphobic hate. And we kind of stand between them and the people spewing the hate at them. And our purpose there is not to protect the people spewing the hate, it's to basically be a buffer and a barrier and a wall, right? So the first time I ever worked with this organization, I was at Lidditz Pride, which is one of the bigger pride events here in central Pennsylvania. And it it's held in a park that is actually not public property. It's a private park. It's open to the public. In fact, most days of the year, the park is wide open to anybody who wants to use it. And so most people think it is a public park, but it's actually owned by a church, which means that when they rent it out to, say, Lidditz Pride, they can exclude certain people because it's not public property. And so the hate preachers aren't allowed in. But they can stand on the sidewalk that everybody has to cross to get in because that is public property. So the first time I ever worked with this organization, I'm there at Lidditz Pride, and the hate preachers are there with their, bullhorns yelling at people as they're walking into Pride. And this couple comes in. They come across the crosswalk. They're walking into the park, and this clown is standing there on top of a step ladder with a bullhorn yelling at people. And it's a mom and a dad and a probably young to mid-teens kid and a like tween to very early teens kid. And the tween to very early teens kid was clearly like figuring out who they were. And my interpretation of the way that this family presented themselves was mom, dad, and older sibling were like, you know what, we're going to support younger sibling and we're going to go with them, or we're going to take them to Pride because this is a very family friendly Pride event, and help them, have a good day and be proud of who they are and love themselves. And so they're walking across the street, minding their own business. They're not talking to anybody. They're not engaging with the hate preachers. They're just minding their own business, walking across the street and into the Pride Festival, right? And this jackass standing on the stepladder with the bullhorn says to these parents, you must not love your kids if you're taking them in there. And like this whole family has walked in already and like walked past. And I happened to look over and I saw it when he said, "You must not love your kids if you're taking them in there." I watched Dad stop dead in his tracks, and I watched the back of his neck turn bright red. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. And he turned around and he was clearly going to go um, have a short and intense conversation with the guy on the stepladder, if you know what I mean. And I walked over and I got between him and the guy on the stepladder. And I'm standing there wearing my collar. And I said, "Look, I'm a dad. I have a kid who's a part of the community. I get it. Okay. I understand that right now you want to go over there and feed him that bullhorn. And I get it because, frankly, I want to go over there and hold his mouth open for you to feed him that bullhorn. But I will tell you right now, that is exactly what he wants you to do. Nothing in this world will make him happier than if you go over there and, sock him in the nose or feed him his teeth." I said, "The very best thing you can do, the thing that you can do that will piss him off more than anything else, is to turn around and walk in there with your wife and kids and enjoy the festival and have a good day." And this dad is standing there in front of me and he's like looking over my shoulder at this guy and he says, he just stood there quiet for a minute. And finally he took a deep breath and he said, "Yeah, you're absolutely right. And thank you uh, for reminding me of that." And he, turned around and walked on into the festival and enjoyed the day with his wife and kids. And I walked back over and, stood on the umbrella line with the rest of the peacekeepers. And this clown up on the um, step ladder kept spewing hate through his bullhorn. And now he's spewing hate at me. And I just completely ignored the guy um, because getting pissed off at him was exactly what he wanted. And I frankly just was not going to give that son of a bitch the satisfaction. Um, Sometimes the most life affirming thing that we can do is choose to be happy. Sometimes the best revenge we can get is to be happy. And for me, paradoxically, um, for me, the path to happiness, the path to being happy is to forgive and not carry that hate and anger and resentment around with me, which means that paradoxically, the path to revenge, if you want to put it that way, is the path of forgiveness. I think that's magnificent, Diz. Singing "Yes, Jesus Loves Me," wearing a queer cape is fantastic. Um, Last year, I had a T-shirt that I had made. It's still upstairs in my closet. You know those name tags that say "Hello, I'm," and then there's a space for you to like write in your name. I had made a T-shirt that the front image was one of those that said "Hello, I'm," and then in big letters in the middle of the white blank says "Sorry." So the shirt says "Hello, I'm sorry." And I was wearing that T-shirt over my collar. And as I was, greeting people at Pride and talking with people at Pride, my point was, I'm sorry for the shitty ways the church has treated the LGBTQ community. Um, I'm sorry for the horrible things that people like me have done to people like you. I'm sorry that you had to walk past those assholes with the bullhorns to even get in here today. Um, and I wore that shirt because I mean that as sincerely as I possibly could. Um, and I've had people tell me that just having somebody in a collar make that apology mattered. Yeah, you know, it matters when we show up and say something. Anyway, as I'm leaving last year, um, I got to walk past the hate preachers, right? And I'm still wearing my "Hello, I'm sorry" shirt. And as I'm walking out, I'm crossing the street, and one of them says, uh, "You're sorry? What are you sorry for?" And I said, "I'm sorry for what people like you do to the folks who come to this thing, and I'm sorry that you have become the public face of Christianity. That makes me so unspeakably sorry, but not as sorry as you are. Have a nice day." So, oh, and you know what? I um, I make it a point to tell folks when I offer to pray for somebody or I offer somebody a blessing that it's totally okay to say no, because I believe consent matters. Um, we had a planning meeting today because my church is going to be at Pride this year. Um, and so we were talking about having a table there and whatever. And one of the things that I said to my folks, my good, loving, lifelong church going Lutheran folk who absolutely believe that God loves queer people and they want to be allies and accomplices of queer people, and they just don't always know how to do that. And one of the things that we talked about, and something that we're actually going to talk about a lot before we actually go to Pride next month, is you need to understand that you may encounter people within the LGBTQ plus community who are not happy to see you at Pride, who don't think churches should be at Pride, who have been so badly wounded by the church that your very presence is enraging for them. And you may, in fact, um, find yourself on the receiving end of some of that rage. Um, and the only thing you need to say in response to that is, "I am so sorry." You don't say, "Not all Christians." You don't say, "But we're not like that." You don't say, "Well, those weren't real Christians." You don't say any of that shit. Okay. All you have to say, if you are, um, if you become the lightning rod that allows somebody to discharge some of their pain, and you know in your heart of hearts and your soul that you did not contribute to that, then all you need to say is, "I am so sorry that that happened to you." That's all you need to say. Um, if you really want to do some next level type stuff, you can say, "I am so sorry that that happened to you. And I am so sorry that people like us didn't stand with you." Yeah, and I'm very adamant with folks at Redeemer that we're not going there to be cishet tourists in queer spaces. Um, we're going there to um, be accomplices. Um, we're going there to um, say as clearly and unequivocally as we can that you are deeply and profoundly loved. Um, and we recognize that we are guests in your space today. And we are grateful for your hospitality and for allowing us to be here. Um, and that whatever we do when we are at a pride event is done from that perspective. Um, and if that means that somebody unloads their pain on us, if that means that somebody unloads their trauma on us in such a way that they are angry at us, yelling at us, whatever, okay. And that's when that whole thing about turn the extra cheek, or excuse me, turn the other cheek, go the extra mile, that's when that shit kicks in, you know. Um, we throw those phrases around all the time. We forget that the guy who gave us those phrases got crucified, um, and told us to do those things and to take up our crosses and follow. So, yeah, if we are um, on the receiving end of somebody's anger and pain, um, that's okay. And maybe it will teach us something about the price of our silence. And maybe it will get us to not be silent in the future. Diz, I'm so sorry about the first one, and I'm so glad about the second one. Because I am so, so glad that you exist. This world is a better place with you in it. So do me a favor and keep existing, okay? Well, folks, it's getting late, so I'm going to call it a night. Thank you all for being here. Um, Feelings all over the place. But y'all remember that you are deeply and profoundly loved. And may the fourth be with you. And may you always rebel against fascism and authoritarianism. And when necessary, may you find the chains you need to strangle that disgusting misogynist space slug who's getting in your way. Peace. God bless you. I love you all. Good night.
Rude. That was pretty fucking rude. That was
This next song is dedicated to the Philadelphia Police Department. It's called No Room for Pigs in Heaven! This next song is dedicated.
Yesterday, House Republicans voted to allow ICE to use taxpayer funds to deport U.S. citizens. Yesterday, House Republicans voted to allow ICE to use tax